Simple, just cutting squares. So we're going to make checkerboard squares. So they're all cut the same size. You need 2 different fabrics for each block, and you just need to dig into your stash and be able to cut 13 from one color and 12 from another color. So be bold. Just put anything together. This is your stash, so you got all kinds of different things. So I've got Christmas here mixed with something very geometric. I've got novelties and some little sticks, stripes with kind of a browny gray that I really didn't like, but it's going to be just fine. This one's got some teddy bears and green on it. So I'm not trying to match anything. All I want to do is get some definition between the 2 fabrics. You can see on the quilt top behind me, that's what I've done. So I have...
Oh, I see what you mean. So what you've done is, like, you don't put like 2 brown and cream squares side by side. You try and mix them over with some different colored ones.
I always try and have whatever's in the block be really different from each other.
Okay.
These are both kind of medium and dark. They're not really, really light, but because of the color, you still see the checkerboard effect. And because I put sashing in between them, we're not thinking about what's touching each other, although we could do that. This uses 25 little squares to cut 2.5 inches, and it works out to a 10-inch square finished.
Okay, so by finished, do you mean like finished, like
Finished inside the quilt.
Oh, okay.
So this measures 10 inches. So
okay, so that's not including your seam allowance.
Not including seam allowances, but you do cut the squares 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Right. So you just need 2 fabrics that are contrasting with each other. So here's some shells and some red swirly stuff, and I thought those 2 would go together nicely. So you're going to lay out your squares and make your checkerboard. So let's just take the teddy bears down for a second. And you're going to lay out your squares, and so you can have for this quilt the light squares, I gotta find one like that, the light squares on the outside corners, or you can have the darker squares on the outside corners. It doesn't matter because we are putting sashing in between, so we aren't trying to keep the checkerboard going throughout the whole quilt, just within the block.
Oh, okay. Now, Paulette, what length of stitch do you use when you're doing your scrappy quilts?
I use a 2. I go down to 2 on my machine. I guess that's 2 millimeters. And that seems to really work for me. It's not so small that I can't pick it out if I want to, but it's not so big that you know, it's not going to stay together. So
yeah.
So you can see here that I'm just making this little grid with, now generally I say to cut 13 of one fabric and 12 of the other, but I always cut 13 of both, because sometimes after I get it together, I think, oh, maybe I want the black on the outside, and just having that 1 extra square will allow you to be able to shift everything over.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Everything over, and you just have a little 2.5 inch square left. You can use leftover jelly rolls or ones you haven't broken into. You can use fat quarters.
Do you mix your fabrics? Like, do you use flannels and cottons and batiks all in the same quilt?
I do not mix flannels with my regular cottons, but I do mix batiks with regular cotton. If it's the color I sort of think I want, that's what I do. So there's my grid for my light fabrics, and then I will be putting these in here. So you can see now how the light and the dark are really starting to show up.
Yeah. Really interesting how the one fabric makes the other one jump.
Yes. And I actually lay the whole block out, and then I start to sew it, so I know ahead what it's going to look like. And if I really don't like this red in here, well, I could just pull those out and put something else in there.
Yeah.
But I do mix very modern fabrics, you know, with geometrics and the things that you kind of see nowadays with my vintage fabrics. I have no problem with mixing those two, and I don't think in this quilt, I mean, I've done that in this quilt, and I think they live together quite nicely.
Really good.
So you're going to sew these into rows. So you've got all your little rows here, and we're going to press towards the darker fabric.
Okay.
So we're pressing towards the darker fabric, and sometimes that will be, you know, the seams will be in the middle or they'll be on the outside, but that's what you'll be doing, pressing towards the dark. It doesn't matter about the end pressing, because we're framing these with sashing, so we're not matching up.
Yeah, so you don't have to worry about it being perfect.
So it doesn't matter which way your seams go. But if you have a really dark fabric, and you can, at the first step, press towards the dark. So then you're going to lay out all your rows and you're going to sew them together. And at the final, when you get at the very end, you can either press all the seams towards one direction, or you can press the seams towards the center.
It doesn't matter, because again, nothing is meeting up with something else,
No.
so it doesn't really matter.
No. And so that's what makes this so easy. It's just squares, and we're not trying to match anything up, and we have a very simple intersection there.
Okay.
So this quilt uses 2 different fabrics in every block, and there's nothing repeated. So you can actually use lots of fabrics. This quilt over here is exactly the same pattern. It's just that I used a solid fabric with a print in every block. So there's the solid and there's the print, there's the solid and there's the print. And it was a personal challenge to be able to put florals with solids in a quilt. And then once I put the sashing in, and you can notice that this sashing is narrower than the sashing I used in this quilt, but it still isolates the block, and your eye is looking at that block, and then it'll go to the next block. It's not looking at one little piece, because everything is up against each other, so that's a little bit trickier to put things together. But it works just as nice to take something, or you could even use a fabric that you love and you've got 2 meters of it, and use that in every block and put something else with your stash with that fabric.
Wonderful. So Paulette, the ultimate question here, how big is the stash now?
My stash or yours?
Yours. This is my stash here, okay?
I tell people I have a vast stash. That's as close as you'll get.
Okay.
But the only last thing is, when you're picking a sashing, and what I often do is pick the sashing first, because then I can decide if the block that I choose is going to work against that sashing. For example, this might not be the best block if I was going to use this pink for the sashing. So sometimes I cut a few sashing pieces, and I have them laying there when I'm cutting my squares and deciding if that's going to be a good choice. But the directions today do give you instructions for the sashing as well.
Okay, so I'll have those run off and ready for you guys in the shop. Let's hope we can get this loaded onto the Facebook. And when I figure out how to do YouTube, Bob's Your Uncle will be good for, oh, Paulette, we could go for hours.
Yes, I could.
Okay, thank you so much, Paulette.
You're welcome.
And she's going to be back next Monday to do another video. I'm sure she waits with bated breath.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, and by the way, I think I might have cut off the beginning of the video, but this is Paulette. Okay, sorry about that. I think I might have cut it off. I'm not sure. We were trying to be so professional. Okay, see you next Monday. Bye-bye.